Well, thank you so much for that. Sorry, I'm back. So I know that you have your earphones, and maybe if you can put on your 3D glasses, then that should complete everything. Now, I'm going to talk about Fiji. My first presentation was very general, talking about the global framework and the global cases of some of the challenges in relation to transitional societies in constitution making. Now, Fiji is one of those complex societies in terms of ethnicity, in terms of culture, in terms of the historical experiences, in terms of religion as well. And it's one of those, just after independence, when Pope Paul, he came to Fiji in 1986. He came to Fiji and he said, no, this is what the world should be like. In fact, the Tourism Council of Fiji used one of the slogans that the Pope Paul used, which was Fiji the way the world should be. Now, but he spoke too early. 1 year later, we had our first coup. Again, the coup was kind of representation of the complexity of that society in many ways. Oh, sorry, let me go back to. Now, let me just briefly talk about the constitutional process in Fiji. We have had 3 constitutions altogether since 1970, when Fiji became independent. Now, the process of independence in Fiji took a while in terms of, there was a period of transition. After the Second World War, of course, Britain was ready to get rid of its colonies. They were getting too expensive, and also there was a lot of move by the colonies themselves to get rid of the colonial power from Africa, Asia, certainly in the Pacific. So it was pressured in many ways to do that. And so by the 1940s with India, and then, of course, in Africa, Ghana, and then it spread like wildfire throughout the world. Now, Fiji became the first Pacific state to be independent was Samoa in 1962. Now, Fiji became independent in 1970, and the process of independence was preceded by negotiation, was preceded by process of transition. The British took some of our leaders to Britain, to Oxford for education in preparation for independence. And there was discussion of the Constitution. In 1969, just 1 year before independence, the leaders of the different political parties in Fiji, they went to London and they talked behind closed doors. In those early days, discussions of constitutions were seen to be something which only experts, and something which politicians, and something which the state players are supposed to be doing. So a lot of the discussions on constitutions, not only Fiji but other countries as well, was very much done by elites behind closed doors. And one of the terms used to describe that is constitutionalism, one of the terms used by political scientists to talk about elite compromises and elite negotiation over constitution. So it was not easy, fundamentally because of the fact that Fiji was very complex in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, and of course the different regions in Fiji traditionally have had different chiefdoms and alliances between them or competition between them. And you had the urban and rural divide as well. So to have a constitution which was able to address all these things was quite a challenge. Now, I've learned from the first presentation, so I'll try to be as fast as I can, otherwise I'll get caught up once more. Now, after independence, one of the first things which Mara, who was the very first Prime Minister of Fiji, he went to Oxford as part of that process of transition. When he came back from Oxford, his accent was very British. In fact, it was said that he was probably more British than Fijian. And other Fijian chiefs who went to Oxford, they came back with, stiff upper lips, British high-class accent. And to some extent, in fact, at some point, being British educated and being able to be a great imitator of British culture and British accent, particularly high-class accent, not the Cockneys, Cockney working class accent, was to be a good chief. A good Fijian chief was a good imitator of British high-class culture. Now, so after independence, one of the first policies of the government was to create what they call the multiracial experiment, where the Indians were brought into Fiji in the 1890s to work in the sugar plantation, and the indigenous Fijians and the Europeans and other Pacific Islanders can live together side by side. So the very first constitution, which was put together as a result of that compromise, was in 1970 called the Independence Constitution. Now, the focus of the Independence Constitution was really to try and create a balance, an ethnic and political balance between the different competing political parties and ethnic groups as well. Now, the political parties were very much ethnic-based in the beginning. So the political parties for the indigenous Fijians was the Alliance Party, and the political party for the Indians was the National Federation Party. Now, during the constitutional talks in London, the National Federation Party, which represented the interest of the Indian population, was arguing for individual vote, in other words, one person, one vote in the new constitution, in the new electoral system. On the other hand, the indigenous Fijian leaders were arguing for communal vote. In other words, seats should be allocated and reserved on the basis of different communal groups. So seats for indigenous Fijians and seats for Indians and other ethnic groups as well. So they came to a compromise. So the first constitution provided for both, where you can have individual votes. Individuals can vote for anyone. And on the other hand, you can also vote for within your own ethnic group. So you have particular seats which are reserved for your particular ethnic group. So you vote within that group. So that was the sense of balance which was put into place in the Constitution, just to make sure that they would avoid any tension and any friction in the future. But the balance was very fragile, fundamentally because the notion of multiracialism, as it operationalized, existed at two levels. The first level has to do with distinctiveness. In other words, various ethnic groups can maintain their identity, their religion and their culture, and can enjoy the liberty of doing whatever they want to do in relation to their own culture. Now, the other aspect of multiracialism had to do with working side by side and coexisting with each other and engaging with each other and recognition of the other ethnic group or the other religion. So those of you who have been to Fiji, you will notice that the public holidays for the major religions are being observed. Of course, the Christian Christmas and Easter, and the Hindus, we have holidays for the Diwali, and then Prophet Muhammad's birthday. We also observe for the Muslims. Now, in 1987, we had the very first coup. Again, one of the ironies of multiracialism is that if you don't sustain its momentum, it is bound to create contradictions. And one of the contradictions had to do with the notion of distinctiveness. And also, the fact that the Constitution actually did not address, like I was talking about earlier in the morning, did not address the issue of inequality. Because during the colonial days, the economy was very much divided along three lines. The Europeans would have the capital, and the Indians were brought over to provide the labor, and the indigenous Fijians, they provided the land. So under the British rule, British colonial rule, the Fijians were locked into the villages, into the subsistence economy, while the Indians worked in the capitalist sector together with the European capital. So after, in the 1960s, when the rigid native policies which locked the indigenous Fijians into the subsistence sector was being liberalized, then they realized that they were behind all the other ethnic groups in terms of education, in terms of professions, in terms of business, and so forth. So some of those grievances which emanated from those inequality later led to ethno-nationalistic mobilization. And by 1987, after the ruling Alliance Party lost the election, the nationalistic forces came to the surface when they realized that power was going to shift away from the indigenous Fijians to the Indian political elites. So that's when the indigenous Fijians nationalism, I was talking about the elephant in the morning. That's when the elephant came to the surface and started shaking. So the whole the state began to rattle as a result of the fact that those inequalities were not being addressed. Now, so that's a warning, which has happened elsewhere in the world. So I suppose in the case of New Caledonia, something to think about as well. Now, after the coup in 1987, there were actually two coups in 1987. One was the first coup by the military to get rid of what they call the Indian-dominated government. And then when some of the indigenous Fijian elites tried to respond and intervene and say, look, this is not a good idea, then they staged another coup to get rid of the state. So the first coup was against the government, the second coup was against the state. So there were two coups altogether. Now let's look at, I have talked about the 1970 Constitution, so I'll move on before the chair tells me to shut up. Now, after the coup in 1987, a new constitution was put into place. The new constitution was largely driven by the indigenous Fijian interest. So instead of the sense of balance which was created by the 1970 Constitution, this time it was driven by the sense of dominance by the indigenous Fijian group. So the seats were reconfigured which favor the indigenous Fijians. One of the terms which was used to underpin the process was the paramountcy of Fijian interests. The notion of paramountcy of Fijian interests was actually invented by the British, because what the British tried to do was to divide up. The British were very good in dividing up the people. They've done it all over the world. The divide and rule policy. So the idea was to give preferences to Fijians as a way of separating them from Indians. When trade unions came together, when the emerging proletariat would come together, the British would use the chiefs to go and tell the Fijians, look, you withdraw from the strikes and from the unions because it's not good for stability in the country. Now, so the 1990 Constitution, in many ways, was an extension of the notion of permanency of the Fijian interest. Now, but it didn't last long because there was a lot of criticism from within Fiji itself and internationally as a result of this particular constitution. Now, it's important to note that even amongst the indigenous Fijians, there were different ideological positions, political positions. There were extremist nationalists who were pushing for Fiji to become an indigenous state. And there were more moderate ones who were talking about multiracialism. And there are those in the middle who talk about how the two extremes can come together. So it was really those in the middle which won the day in terms of the debate over the dominance of the Tokay. Tokay is the term which is used to refer to the indigenous Fijians. Tokay literally means the owners of the land, or the owners, in short. Tokay ni Vanua, which is owners of the land. Now, so in 1997, they decided to reform the constitution. So the constitution shifted away from being a Tokay-dominated constitution to a much more democratic constitution, where the leader of the 1987 coup himself, Rambuka, General Rambuka, he was very much involved in that transition. Now, the 1997 Constitution went through much wider consultation. They went to South Africa, they went to Malaysia, they went to Europe, they went to various countries in the world with a briefcase trying to look for examples, trying to look for models which they can use back in Fiji. So the constitutional, 5 minutes. Yes, let me hurry. So, and they introduced the Bill of Rights, and they introduced a social justice provision, which has to do with affirmative action, because affirmative action was seen as a means by which they can address the inequality. So it has to be constitutionalized. In 2001, I was commissioned by the government to put together the affirmative action plan for Fiji to try and address some of the inequalities, particularly in the economic aspect of things. But unfortunately, as what has happened to other affirmative action plans around the world, in South Africa, in Malaysia, what Fiji did was to copy the affirmative action plan from Malaysia. South Africa copied from Malaysia as well. But it was the elites who were running it, who converted it into something to fill up their pockets. So there's a lot of corruption. So there's a lot of, all those dirty deals which were taking place, which gave affirmative action a very bad name. Now, and of course, in 2000, there was another coup, again, a nationalistic coup, like the 1987 coup. And so the constitution was suspended, but then it was reinstated after it went through the courts. And then, so over the years, there had been a number of transition within Fiji in terms of the role of the military. So in 2006, we had another coup. This time, it was the coup by the military against a government which was seen to be nationalistic. So the military had changed its color from being a nationalistic military now into a multi-racial military, at least on the surface. But of course, things are much more complex than that. So after the 2006 coup, they had to come up with another constitution. So, so the process of constitutional consultation was taking place at different levels. So in 2013, or the year before that, the government put together, the military-backed government put together a team of constitutional experts, including Yasgai, who has been responsible for a lot of constitutions around the Pacific and from around the world, who was an expert. Now, the Attorney General of Fiji did his master's under Yasgai. Professor Yasgai was professor of law at Hong Kong University. So Yasgai was earlier engaged as an advisor by the Attorney General. But then there were differences between them, between the student and the professor. And as a result, the professor's draft was thrown away by the student. And then the student put together his own draft, which is now the 2013 Fiji Constitution. Now, which they referred to as the clean-up constitution. So the whole idea was to try and put together, to address the issue of conflict, the issue of security in Fiji, the issue of economic inequality, and issue of human rights, the issue of gender rights, a whole lot of other rights. So when you look at it, it's quite highly sophisticated in terms of embedding so many things in it to address various aspects of society, various aspects of conflict. Now, one of the significant aspects of the Constitution had to do with the role of the military, because, like I mentioned earlier, in my earlier presentation, like Turkey, what the Constitution talks about is the fact that the military is the guardian of security, the guardian of the Constitution, which I thought was a bit dangerous, because it's as if when you make the military, when you make a security institution to look after the Constitution, then it takes the power away from the people. So that's one of the dilemmas of the new Constitution. Now, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from Fiji? Now it's important that any constitution making must connect with the elephant, must connect with what's happening on the ground, must connect with socioeconomic inequality, must connect with culture, must connect with what people are saying. In other words, to tame the elephant, as you can see there. Now, it has to be a win-win situation. What they try to do in Fiji, all the time they try to do a win-win situation, and hopefully this particular constitution can do that. But still, people are not happy. And of course, no constitution can make everybody happy. You can't make all the people all the time happy about everything. And also, the consultation has to be genuine. The consultation which were taking place in the early constitutions were very much driven by elites, driven by experts. When elites and experts take over the constitution, then you begin to have a bit of problem, because the will and ideas of the people need to be taken aboard. Now, the 1913 constitution, they have learned from the past, so they were beginning to do that. They had nationwide consultation with fishermen, with coconut farmers, with the unemployed, and of course, at another level, with professors and everybody else. And of course, the sense of ownership, but it still has to be seen at the end of the day, the legitimacy of the Constitution has to do with its sense of ownership. Now, the question of security is very important, because often we associate security with coercion, with the military. And of course, over the years, human security has become a very important component of the way in which security is being redefined. And new constitutions now, the Fiji Constitution tries to do that, is to incorporate human security into the Constitution as a way of addressing some of the issues. One of the issues as well has to do with the spoilers. Now, in Fiji, there have been spoilers. There have been what sociologists call ethnic entrepreneurs who have tried their best to undermine the process. So it's very important to bring them in to the picture. So they try to do that. In 1997, they failed to do that. And as a result, particularly some extreme nationalist elements were able to make use of any opportunity to derail the process. Now, and of course, the last point is to make sure that it's not just lawyers, but to have an interdisciplinary team to be part of the process. Because increasingly the world is getting more and more complex. And I think one of the lessons that Fiji learned from the early days was that if you leave too much hope in lawyers and the legal people to design the constitution, then you might the possibility you're going to leave out a lot of things. So it's important to have as many representatives of the intelligentsia as possible who are part of the process. And of course, I'll finish off by taming the elephant. So it's a way in which the Constitution can help to tame the elephant, because at the end of the day, the elephant, when it's angry, as we've seen in Fiji, things can go haywire, and then we start again. So we have had 3 constitutions: 1970 Constitution, the 1990 Constitution, 4 constitutions, and the 1997 Constitution, and the 2013 Constitution. So I hope that, so every time there's a mistake, the elephant gets angry. And when the elephant gets angry, we have to go through another constitution. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Steven, pour votre intervention. Et on va essayer de prendre soin de l'éléphant. Ici aussi, même si on n'a pas beaucoup d'éléphants dans le Pacifique, l'image est assez parlante. On va prendre quelques minutes pour les questions qui peuvent concerner l'ensemble des interventions qui ont eu lieu ce matin. Les présentateurs de la précédente session sont toujours là, donc n'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions ou des commentaires à apporter aux présentations. Ouais, moi, je vais commencer peut-être, parce que ça lancera les questions. J'ai une question qui s'adresse à nos 2 intervenants là, qui nous ont présenté la situation à Vanuatu et à Fidji. Je vais essayer de la faire en anglais. What was the composition of the population by the time of the first constitution and the independence in Fiji and Vanuatu in terms of ethnicity?
Oh, awesome. Sorry. Yeah. Now, at the time of the 1970 Constitution, that was at the time of independence. In fact, the Indians had consisted of more than 50% of the population. So the indigenous Fijians were a minority, about 47% of the population. Okay. So, and then that was also part of the causes of the tension, because there was fear amongst the indigenous Fijians that already Indo-Fijians, or the Indians, had high population, and also they controlled the economy. So in terms of economic disparity, they had more wealth than the Fijians.
That's the majority of the population.
Yeah, with the majority of the population. But then after the coup in 1987, that's when everything changed. A lot of the Indians migrated out of the country. So, so now the population is about 57% indigenous Fijians, and about 38, 39 Indians, okay. And the rest make up the other population.
Okay, thank
you. Je n'ai pas les chiffres en tête, mais pendant ce temps-là, la population autochtone était déjà en majorité. Les colons, les Européens, ils constituaient une petite poignée de personnes, mais qui contrôlaient l'économie et tout.
C'est comme si c'était une part très faible de la population.
Oui, tout à fait. Ouais. C'était une part très faible de la population, pour répéter ce que... Ouais.
Merci.
Yeah, sorry. Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the disparity in wealth, in fact, as late as the 1990s in the corporate business sector, there's a difference of like the Indians had almost 8 times more in terms of wealth than the indigenous Fijians, so within the corporate sector itself.
D'autres questions? Vous êtes affamé ou... Oui.
Bonjour.
Si vous pouvez juste penser à vous présenter avant de poser votre question.
Je m'appelle Bilo.
Merci.
Non, c'est juste une remarque à Monsieur Ratuva. C'est juste pour le remercier d'avoir précisé le fait que, comme il disait tout à l'heure, qu'il n'y a pas que les experts qui ont une pensée. La plupart des constitutions dans le Pacifique, ils disent we the people, nous le peuple. Je dis ça parce que au mois de septembre de cette année, j'ai participé au Forum des îles du Pacifique. Et ce que j'ai remarqué là-bas, c'est qu'il y a une certaine hégémonie de l'expertise étrangère. Et je leur ai dit que c'est important de cultiver la vigilance afin que les expertises étrangères ne deviennent pas de nouvelles formes de colonisation. Et j'aimerais dire ici aussi que les expertises, quoi qu'on en peut dire, c'est important, mais en même temps, elles peuvent demeurer stériles si on n'arrive pas à les contextualiser à un moment donné. Voilà, c'est tout ce que je voulais dire. Merci.
Merci pour cette précision et cette attention apportée. On a parlé, ça a été évoqué dans les interventions ce matin, de ce cadre international qui était donné, le International Template, où on essaye effectivement de faire entrer, qui parfois effectivement ne correspond pas aux spécificités locales, aux cultures. C'est pas un modèle unique. D'autres interventions? Ouais.
Oui, bonjour. Émile Lechereau, élu. J'ai une question par rapport à l'image de l'éléphant. Concernant, dans les différents exemples, quand les gens se sont mis à réfléchir sur leur avenir, leur constitution, est-ce que ce que vous avez fait, ça va plus loin de comparer ce qu'ils avaient comme possibilité et de comparer à ceux qu'ils ont eu comme possibilité après, quand ils ont accédé à la souveraineté? Parce que ce n'est pas la même... L'ouverture, en termes de résolution, parce que les pieds de l'éléphant, là, c'est tous les problèmes qui se posent à la société. Mais les réponses apportées ne sont pas les mêmes. Il y a différentes aussi. Par rapport à l'ouverture, quand le pays passe à un statut international, il y a d'autres ouvertures. Est-ce que ça, vous avez été jusque-là? Merci.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I hope I have understood the question. So, yeah, the elephant is really just a metaphor for the relationship between, if you like, the constitution at that level and some of the issues at the lower level, at the deeper level, and how the two can relate with each other. So certainly, like you said, different countries have different circumstances and different historical experiences and different ways in which they can respond to those issues. And I think, see, in the case of Fiji, in the beginning, we really did not feed the elephant well. As a result, the elephant got angry. The inequality, like the 1970 Constitution, was very much based on elite negotiation and compromise and balance, to have ethnic political balance. But you can have ethnic political balance, but if you still have economic differences at the lower level, which were not addressed, that can create the kind of nationalism which emerged in Fiji in the 1970s, when they realized that the socioeconomic conditions were not moving hand in hand with the political transition. Yeah. So you can have the best constitution in the world. You can have the most internationally reputable constitution in the world. That's what we had in 1997. It was seen as one of the most enlightening constitutions in the world. One of the very few which started to have the Bill of Rights in it. The Bill of Rights was very far-reaching. Not many constitutions in the world have Bill of Rights, which basically spelled out rights of citizens in different spheres of life. In fact, there was resistance to some of those rights as well. The rights of people with different sexual orientation, for instance, one of the few constitutions in those days which had that, with gays and so forth. There was opposition from the more conservative members of society who said that once you allow for people of different sexual orientation to have the same rights as everybody else, then you might have cases where you can marry animals and so forth, have sex with animals. So those were the kinds of reaction which would coming in, because the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was so far ahead in relation to its commitment to international conventions. Yeah. So, and then people had to catch up with what was happening. And then, and of course, there was a bit of disjuncture between the beautiful Constitution and what was happening on the ground. And as a result, it led to another coup. Yeah. So we can have the most beautiful Constitution in the world, but if it lacks the ability to address the fundamental issues of inequality, of people's grievances on the ground, then the elephant can move, and then the beautiful golden seat on top can topple over.
Merci. D'autres questions?
Je m'appelle Jean Van Maille, écrivain. L'intervention de mon camarade devant m'a permis de prendre la parole et je remercie le conférencier de Fidji qui a abordé un problème crucial à mon avis. J'ai eu l'occasion d'intervenir il y a un an ou un peu plus d'un an dans cette même enceinte lors de la conférence de M. Merle et de M. Krishnap, et je leur disais que tout ce qui se fait actuellement au niveau du gouvernement central, au niveau du gouvernement de la Nouvelle-Calédonie, est basé sur un schéma signé en 1998 qui nous mène tout droit vers 2018. Un schéma qui est décalé maintenant par rapport à ce que vivent les Calédoniens, comment ressentent les Calédoniens, comment sont les jeunes d'aujourd'hui. On ne connaît rien. On se base simplement sur ce schéma-là et on va tout droit, peut-être, dans le vide. Et ce que vous disiez, monsieur, pour l'histoire de l'éléphant, il faut absolument consulter la population locale, les communautés locales, pour savoir ce que les gens veulent vraiment. Parce que les slogans politiques sont entretenus pour qu'ils puissent survivre, ces messieurs et ces dames, mais pas pour nous. Et moi, je me fais du souci pour nous, pas pour moi, pour mes enfants, mes petits-enfants, vos petits-enfants. Leur avenir n'est pas forcément dans ce qu'ils réclament, ces personnes-là, sur les revanches du passé, sur les ressentiments du passé, mais il faut parler d'avenir et parler pour les enfants.
Merci. Merci pour votre intervention. Je crois que Non, il y a encore une question ou pas? Oui. On va prendre peut-être une dernière question et puis on va faire la pause.
Oui, bonjour, Diko Adrawan. Je voulais remercier les conférenciers et en les écoutant dans les différentes interventions, il y a une remarque, c'est que c'est la place occupée par la dimension humaine. Voilà. La dimension humaine, elle est importante. Je dis ça parce que, voilà, tout à l'heure, il y avait un monsieur qui parlait des schémas, des propositions. Si on n'intègre pas les contextes dans lesquels on vit, les réalités économiques, les problématiques sociaux, eh bien, je pense qu'on passe à côté. Comme dit souvent, on passe à côté de la plaque. Donc aujourd'hui, la deuxième remarque, c'est les richesses. On parle d'inégalité. Aujourd'hui, il y a une richesse qui est importante en Calédonie. C'est sa jeunesse. Et je n'ai pas entendu parler beaucoup de jeunesse. C'est une grande richesse qu'il faut intégrer dans les réflexions aujourd'hui. Parce que la grande majorité de la population, c'est sa jeunesse ici. Et je pense que la grande richesse, ce n'est pas le nickel. En premier lieu, je mets la jeunesse. C'est sa jeunesse. Voilà. Je voulais juste partager pour dire qu'il ne faut pas oublier dans les réflexions la jeunesse pour pouvoir se projeter encore mieux dans le futur. Préparer la jeunesse pour mieux gérer notre pays. Merci.
Merci.
Can I respond to that? Sorry, if I can just briefly respond to that. Thanks very much for bringing up the issue of youth, because I think that's very crucial. Because something we also need to look at is the differences between generations. The generation now and the generation and the younger generation, they have different expectations. They have much higher expectations from society, from the world around them. And if those expectations are not met, so you're bound to have some grievances. Certainly, that was happened in Fiji, in Tonga. The big riots in Tonga was very much driven by the youths. I've done a lot of study in Tonga because the expectations were not met. Same thing in Fiji, the riots which happened after the coup, basically by the youths. So it's important to get them to be part of the conversation, to be part of the process, because after all, the Constitution is for them. It's for their future, as my friend there talked about. And therefore, it has to be futuristic in whatever we do, not to satisfy the demands now, not to satisfy our own interests, those of us who live in this generation, but generations to come. Because after all, constitutions have to do with longevity, has to do with perpetuity, has to do with sustainability for the future.